Chief Justice John Roberts tried to corner Representative Jasmine Crockett with condescension, until she calmly unraveled his argument using his own legal opinions. The hearing room in the Dirksen Senate office building was packed. Cameras perched like vultures in every corner. Reporters were scribbling notes, some just waiting for a moment of chaos to break the monotony of suits and protocol. The air smelled like old carpet and too many egos. It was supposed to be a routine session on judicial ethics. Another one of those high-level discussions where a lot gets said and almost nothing gets done. But there was tension today. You could feel it in the way people sat forward in their chairs. Because in the room sat Chief Justice John Roberts, and across from him, among the lawmakers, was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Crockett had her hair pulled back tight, a navy blue suit sharper than the air conditioning, and a stack of papers that looked far more organized than anyone else's. She'd waited her turn patiently, flipping through notes, ignoring the occasional sideways glances. When her name was finally called, she didn't hesitate. She straightened her back, leaned toward the microphone, and spoke with clarity. Chief Justice Roberts, in the matter of transparency regarding recusal standards, particularly when personal relationships are involved, how do you justify... He cut her off, not with volume, but with tone. Congresswoman, I trust you're not suggesting that personal friendships automatically imply ethical compromise? The words were wrapped in courtesy, but they were barbed. He smirked faintly. The room shifted. Some chuckled under their breath. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't rude. But everyone heard it. Everyone saw it. It was the kind of reply meant to belittle without being obvious. Like an inside joke you weren't meant to be smart enough to catch. Crockett smiled politely, but she didn't reply right away. John Roberts adjusted his glasses, looking past her like she'd already wasted enough time. The moment lingered. To many, this looked like a rookie congresswoman reaching beyond her depth, poking the Chief Justice of the United States. Some even glanced at their phones, maybe waiting for the soundbite to hit Twitter. But Crockett didn't flinch. She flipped a page in her notes, calmly, then looked back up. Chief Justice, she said slowly, with respect, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking how you reconcile public trust with undisclosed relationships when those relationships overlap with parties appearing before the court. Should the American people just assume good judgment in silence? There was a murmur, a little louder this time, but Roberts leaned back, smug. That sounds like an opinion. Congress typically avoids questioning judicial motives. A few heads bobbed in agreement. Crockett didn't move. She didn't blink. Back in the third row, a young Senate aide whispered to another, "She's going to fold." But she didn't. Instead, she glanced down at one paper on her stack, one she hadn't touched until now. It was marked in red pen, and she smiled, just slightly. But no one realized yet. That smile wasn't nerves. It was precision. For a second, Roberts looked like he'd won the exchange. His body relaxed. A few quiet chuckles from the back of the room tried to fill the silence. But Crockett just kept looking down at the paper. Her fingers gently tapped the corner, rhythmic, thoughtful. She glanced back up. You mentioned that Congress typically avoids questioning judicial motives, she said, her voice even. I agree, but this isn't about motives. This is about accountability. Roberts didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence had the same tone as before, calculated dismissal. But Crockett continued. When Justice Albright failed to disclose his presence at 2 private retreats sponsored by political donors with active cases before the court, she said, no internal review was initiated, no written recusal statement, just silence. Should we also assume good judgment then? Now the silence hit harder. Several people turned their heads. Even Senator Renner, who'd barely looked up all morning, stopped scrolling his phone. John Roberts looked uncomfortable for the first time. That's not under the purview of this hearing, he said firmly, his jaw tightening. With respect, Crockett replied, when the Chief Justice says nothing, it sets precedent. A pause. She let that sit there, heavy. There was no outburst, no raised voice. She was doing exactly what Roberts didn't expect, drawing him into a legal exchange he couldn't easily laugh off. The thing is, Jasmine Crockett didn't come from wealth. She wasn't groomed at private institutions or fast-tracked into politics. She came out of Waxahachie, Texas. Her dad was a public school janitor. Her mother worked nights in a hospital laundry room. And she'd clawed her way into law school, paying her way through part-time legal work and debate competitions. That grit? It never left. She'd spent years in Texas courtrooms, often as the only black woman in the room, defending clients nobody else wanted. She didn't need to raise her voice to prove she belonged. She just needed a question they couldn't answer. And that red-marked page? It was a 2014 opinion authored by Roberts himself, an obscure one, not often cited, but she remembered it because it dealt with judicial accountability and the appearance of impropriety. She leaned forward. In Lex Welva Chambly, you wrote that public confidence in the judiciary hinges not only on the absence of bias, but on the absence of perceived bias. She looked up straight at him. So, Chief Justice, how do you reconcile that with silence on repeated incidents involving justices attending events funded by politically affiliated organizations? Roberts blinked. That quote came out of nowhere, but it was his words. And now it was echoing back at him in a public room, on record. He adjusted his posture. The judiciary cannot be expected to respond to every accusation, he said stiffly. There are boundaries. Crockett didn't argue. She didn't need to. She picked up another sheet. Would you consider it outside those boundaries to disclose if you personally attended an event sponsored by a donor with an active interest before the court? He paused. I would evaluate each situation carefully. Her eyes narrowed. Have you attended such an event in the past year? Another pause. The aide in the third row leaned forward now, no longer whispering. This wasn't what they expected from a freshman congresswoman. Crockett knew it too, but she didn't smile this time. She looked dead serious. And Roberts, for all his prestige, looked like he wanted to move on. But she wasn't going to let him. Not yet. Roberts shifted in his chair ever so slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the front row to notice. The camera operator standing behind the press pool zoomed in tighter on his face. He kept his voice measured, but something in the rhythm had changed. I don't believe this hearing is the proper venue for personal questioning, Congresswoman, he said, his tone a little flatter now. Jasmine Crockett held eye contact. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She let the silence hang again, almost daring him to say more. Then, calmly, she replied, That's interesting, because this hearing was called to assess transparency in judicial ethics. If personal conduct affects public trust, isn't that exactly what we should be discussing? Roberts gave a tight smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He glanced toward Chairman Danvers, hoping for a redirect, maybe a tap of the gavel, something to bail him out. But Danvers didn't budge. He just looked from Crockett to Roberts and back again. Everyone knew what was happening now. The Chief Justice was being pressed, not insulted, not attacked, just pressed, and there was nowhere to hide. Crockett continued. You wrote in 2014 that perceived bias is corrosive to institutional integrity. Not just actual bias, perceived bias. So why has the court, under your leadership, refused to adopt a binding code of ethics? She wasn't attacking him personally. She was using his own language to hold him accountable. That's what stung the most. Roberts's lips tightened. There have been internal discussions. Discussions don't build trust, she said. Standards do. A senator on the far end of the dais, Harold Klein from Arizona, leaned into his mic. Let her finish, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Roberts took a breath. He looked like he wanted to lean back again, but realized the camera was still on him. So he held his posture. Too proud to retreat, too smart to lash out. Crockett slowly pulled another document from her folder. This time, it wasn't a Supreme Court opinion. It was a series of emails, public record, between a senior justice's spouse and the organizer of a political retreat. This email was sent 2 weeks before a case involving election integrity reached your docket. The event was not disclosed. The justice did not recuse, and this committee has received no explanation. She didn't name the justice. She didn't have to. Everyone in the room already knew, but she kept going. I'm not suggesting corruption. I'm asking why the court doesn't feel obligated to explain conduct that, by your own standard, could damage institutional integrity. Roberts opened his mouth, then closed it. Crockett looked directly at him. Should the public trust an institution that refuses to regulate itself? The question wasn't a trap. It was simple, honest. That's what made it devastating. Roberts tried to pivot. Congresswoman, we must protect the independence of the judiciary. Exactly, she said, cutting in gently. And the best way to protect it is by ensuring the public believes in its integrity. It was quiet now. No side whispers, no shifting chairs, just that steady, pounding silence of a room watching someone walk a line they weren't supposed to walk, and doing it with grace. Roberts turned back toward his notes, flipping a page, pretending to search for something, but it was just noise, a distraction. Crockett let the silence linger, then sat back in her chair. Chairman Danvers finally spoke. "Time has expired." Crockett nodded, gathered her papers slowly, and looked down at her hands, calm, controlled, still. She didn't need applause. She had just flipped the room. But the most powerful part hadn't even happened yet. The hearing moved on. Next was Representative Glennon from Minnesota. He cleared his throat, shuffled his notes, asked a few rehearsed questions about judicial term limits, and then yielded back his time. A few senators mumbled to each other. The room was trying to recover, but the shift had already happened, and everyone felt it. The cameras that were once sweeping across the panel now held still, fixed, on her, Jasmine Crockett. She sat quietly, flipping through her notes, almost like she was done. But she wasn't. A recess was called 10 minutes later. Lawmakers stood, some heading for the hallway, others heading straight for their phones. Roberts removed his glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose, and muttered something to his aide. A staffer asked him if he'd like to skip the next round and reconvene after lunch. He waved it off. He wasn't going anywhere. Neither was she. When the session resumed, it was time for follow-ups. That meant Crockett had a second chance. A limited one. 2 minutes. She didn't waste a second of it. "Chief Justice," she began, "I'd like to revisit your 2008 dissent in Cooper v. Tillman." He blinked, clearly surprised. That was an obscure ruling. Barely anyone remembered the case. A lower court ethics complaint that never made national headlines, but she had the transcript in her hands. "In your dissent, you wrote, and I quote, 'Ethical clarity is not a luxury afforded to the courts. It is a necessity required of them.'" She paused. "Do you still believe that?" Roberts hesitated. That statement was context-specific, referring to— "No, sir," Crockett interrupted politely. "Those words weren't conditional. They were your words. And if ethical clarity is a necessity, then what would you call the court's refusal to adopt mandatory disclosures?" He folded his hands, measuring his reply. "We are currently reviewing options to strengthen our internal guidelines." She raised an eyebrow. "Are those options public?" He didn't answer. Then she dropped the final pin. "One of your justices sat on a luxury yacht owned by a real estate developer who had a pending case. No one disclosed it. The public learned about it from investigative journalists. Do you consider that to be ethical clarity?" The air pulled tight. Someone shifted in their seat, finally. A senator coughed awkwardly. One of the interns dropped a pen and didn't bother picking it up. Roberts' voice dropped just slightly. "Congresswoman, I am not in the habit of discussing my colleagues' personal affairs." "That's the point," she said. "The public doesn't want discretion. They want standards." His eyes narrowed. "You're treading into dangerous territory." She didn't even blink. So is silence. And just like that, she had cornered him. Because it was never about one justice, one yacht, one trip. It was about the pattern, the quiet comfort of power unchecked, and she was using his own published opinions to shine a flashlight on it. Crockett then looked across the room, not at Roberts, but at the other lawmakers. There are people in this country who lose their jobs over one missed disclosure on a government form, but Supreme Court justices answer to no one. What does that tell the American people? The question didn't need an answer. The silence was the answer. Roberts shifted again. This time it wasn't subtle. His jaw moved side to side, the way someone does when they're biting back what they really want to say. Chairman Danvers looked down at his watch. "Last question, Representative Crockett." She glanced back at Roberts. "Can you name one action taken by this court in the past 5 years to restore trust with the American people?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She waited. And then— "That's what I thought," she said, sitting back. A few reporters outside the room had already started typing headlines, but inside, no one moved. But Crockett still had one card left to play, and it was the one no one expected. Roberts took a slow breath. You could see it. He was trying to reset, to find control again, but it was slipping. He wasn't being shouted down. He wasn't being attacked. That would have been easier to counter. What he was facing instead was precise, methodical pressure, with no theatrics to blame it on, just facts. Crockett folded her papers and placed them neatly in front of her. She didn't need them anymore. Chairman Danvers gave the floor to another representative, but the questions floated past. Polite, dry, measured. The kind that made Roberts feel like he was regaining ground. Then, with 10 minutes left in the session, Danvers unexpectedly circled back. "Representative Crockett," he said, "if you have one final question, the floor is yours." Roberts didn't look up, but Crockett already was. She leaned forward again, her tone quiet. "Chief Justice, do you believe there should be consequences for violating the ethical standards you've publicly supported?" He didn't answer immediately. "Ethical concerns should be reviewed on a case-by-case basis," he said slowly. She nodded once, then reached for a small envelope from her folder. "Then I'd like to submit, for the record, 3 amicus briefs your office received last year, all from advocacy groups that, at the time, had open litigation pending before the court. 2 of those briefs were submitted days after those same organizations hosted private donor dinners that included one sitting justice. None of this was disclosed." The room stiffened again. She slid the envelope across the desk. "I'm not accusing anyone of breaking the law," she added, "but I am asking why there is no independent review body to even examine this kind of overlap. If this were any other branch of government, it would be a scandal." Roberts cleared his throat, visibly tense. "The judicial branch is distinct for a reason, Congresswoman." "And distinct doesn't mean above scrutiny," she replied. Roberts finally looked up at her, but this time it wasn't smugness. It was calculation. He realized, in real time, that she wasn't just a politician looking for a soundbite. She had come prepared with a full chain of documented inconsistencies, and she was threading them together into a single, unshakable narrative. And now, Crockett brought it home. "Your own public speeches," she said, "have stressed the need for civic trust in the judiciary. You've spoken about it at multiple law schools. But when asked today for one clear example, just one, of action taken to build that trust, you offered none. No accusation, no insult, just truth. And in this room, with the cameras still rolling, that truth sat heavier than any outburst ever could. I want to believe the court still holds itself to a higher standard," she added. "But right now, the country sees lifetime appointments with zero oversight. It sees private jets, luxury retreats, hidden affiliations, and it sees silence." She paused. "Is that silence justice?" Roberts closed his folder. He looked tired, older, not beaten, but exposed. "No further comment," he said. The chairman didn't even try to stretch the moment. He tapped the gavel lightly. "The hearing is adjourned." People stood up slowly. Some lawmakers went straight for the hallway, pretending to check their phones. Others lingered in their seats, eyes flicking from Crockett to Roberts. It was hard to describe the atmosphere, but whatever it was, respect, discomfort, admiration, it was different now. Reporters didn't run to Roberts. They ran to her. But Crockett didn't stop to talk. She gathered her things, nodded once to Danvers, and walked calmly toward the side exit, heels echoing against the floor. But even as she left the room, the real impact was still unfolding. Outside those walls, across millions of screens. Outside the Dirksen building, the air was thick with reporters. They crowded the marble steps, blocking the exit, waving microphones like they were trying to pull words out of her. "Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe Roberts acted unethically? Do you want him investigated? Was this about politics?" She didn't answer. Not right away. Her aide, Devon, walked beside her, tall, quiet, always scanning the crowd. He leaned in. "We can take the side exit through Hart if you want." Crockett didn't even look over. "No need." They stepped into the daylight. No coat, no makeup crew, no press handler whispering talking points. Just her, walking straight down the steps with that same quiet resolve she'd carried into the hearing. And then she stopped, turned toward the press. A dozen mics flew forward. She raised a hand, not to hush them, but just enough to say she had something to say. "I'm not interested in embarrassing anyone," she said. "I'm interested in protecting the credibility of the highest court in the country." A few cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "That's the quote." "If a public school teacher can be fired for not reporting a conflict of interest," she continued, "we should expect more from Supreme Court justices, not less." She didn't take questions. She didn't need to. She walked toward the street, leaving the crowd buzzing behind her. Inside the building, Chief Justice Roberts sat alone at the long wooden table. Most of the members had cleared out. His aide was saying something about a schedule adjustment, a ride, maybe a call from someone on the Hill. He didn't hear it. He stared down at the notes he didn't get to finish. In the corner of the paper was a line he'd once written, years ago, for a speech at a judicial symposium in Indianapolis. The law serves no one if not trusted by all. He never expected to hear his own words thrown back at him like that, and certainly not by her. Back in her office on the other side of the Capitol, Crockett sat at her desk, slowly removing her earrings. Devin came in holding his phone. "You've seen this?" She shook her head. He played the clip. It was already all over social media. Her quote, "The public doesn't want discretion. They want standards." It had caught fire. Not just on political Twitter, but on teacher pages, nurses' unions, veterans' forums. People who'd never heard her name before were sharing it, not because she said it loudly, but because she said what they'd been thinking for years. She leaned back in her chair. "This isn't about me," she said quietly. "No," Devin said, "but they heard you." That night, cable news twisted the hearing into its usual sideshow. Some anchors praised her poise. Others said she disrespected a sitting Chief Justice. But the raw footage, the actual exchange, was being shared faster than any edited clip. No spin, just truth. And that's what hit. The next morning, one of Crockett's old law school professors sent her a single message. "You cross-examined a Supreme Court justice in front of the world. Not bad for a girl from Waxahachie." She smiled, but didn't reply. Because this wasn't about clapbacks or personal glory. This was about drawing a line. Because if the people who make the rules don't follow them, then what does that leave for everyone else? But the true test wasn't what happened in that hearing room. It was what came next. The ripple of accountability it triggered across institutions too used to silence. 3 days later, the hearing transcript was published in full. No edits, no summaries, just the raw exchange. Legal blogs picked it apart. Professors used it in lectures. Even late-night shows clipped it. But for once, they didn't mock. They just played the audio. No shouting, no drama. Just one congresswoman holding the most powerful judge in the country to his own standard. And the public responded. Emails poured into Crockett's office. Hundreds, then thousands. A retired judge from Boise. A paralegal in Kansas City. A third-grade teacher in Tucson. Most weren't political. Most didn't care about party lines. What they all shared was a simple message. Thank you. That's what accountability looks like. Crockett didn't do victory laps. She didn't run to MSNBC or call into radio shows. She stayed off camera, worked her schedule, took her meetings. The moment had come and gone, but the message stayed. Back at the Supreme Court, the press secretary issued a short statement. The Chief Justice stands by his comments and remains committed to transparency through appropriate channels. It landed with a thud. No one even retweeted it. A week later, a bipartisan group of lawmakers reintroduced a bill proposing a formal code of conduct for Supreme Court justices. Nothing flashy, just basic rules, mandatory disclosures, third-party ethics reviews, consequences for misconduct. It had failed twice before. Now it had real traction. Because people finally saw what the absence of rules looked like, how quiet power becomes dangerous when left unquestioned. And all it took was one woman, one stack of notes, and the courage to hold her ground. Jasmine Crockett never said she won anything. In interviews, when pressed about the moment, she always steered the conversation back to the public. This wasn't about making headlines, she said. This was about showing people what it looks like to stand your ground, even when the room is stacked against you. And maybe that's the lesson. You don't need a gavel to hold someone accountable. You don't need power to speak the truth. You just need the facts, the composure to carry them, and the guts not to fold when someone powerful tries to make you feel small, because truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in wearing heels, speaks plainly, and lets the silence do the rest. That hearing didn't change the world. Not overnight. But for a few minutes, millions of people saw a glimpse of what integrity can look like under pressure. And maybe, just maybe, they started expecting more from those who serve them. So if you've ever been told to stay quiet, to keep your head down, to let things slide for the sake of peace, remember this. Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from accountability. And accountability begins when someone decides to speak anyway. If this story made you think, really think, then take a second to share it. Let others hear it too. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. Because stories like this matter, and we've got more to tell.